This video will be discussing the claim that the Israeli government has committed the crime of genocide in Gaza. The window of discussion is going to be opened after October 7th, and any other events that you think merit notice must unfortunately be limited for the sake of focus. As well, I will not be providing illustrations for this video so that I can release it as soon as possible and focus completely on the argument. The central argument of this video is that the Israeli government has committed the crime of genocide in Gaza, where it has killed 20,057 people. Genocide is the crime of crimes. It is considered the ultimate crime against humanity, and any accusation of such must be based on a sober command of the facts and reasoning behind it. The claim is certainly controversial and is being argued about online, but nonetheless, despite the vitriol and controversy surrounding it, the claim must be seriously examined. To that end, this video will endeavor to make this argument using the sources of international law and international legal scholarship relevant to this topic. To begin this argument, I want to spend some time breaking the taboo of this discussion. It's no secret that this is not something that people in Western countries, especially the US, are receptive to hearing. However, to counter an immediate dismissal of the legitimacy of this topic from an audience that might be primed to not want to consider it, I will go over the immense amount of support for this claim that exists globally and among experts. This isn't introduced to argue that the authority of these sources affects the validity of the argument, but rather to show that this is not a claim that is so marginal that it can be dismissed out of hand and on its face. Though even if it was marginal, the argument would naturally have to and can stand on its own. Of course, some of the first leaders of the world to charge Israel with genocide were those in the Middle East and beyond. Palestine's President Mahmoud Abbas told America's Secretary of State Antony Blinken about his concerns over Israeli genocide in Gaza. In the rest of the Arab and Muslim world, states like Algeria and Iran have accused Israel of genocide, along with many Arabic opinion writers. In the rest of the global south, states like South Africa, Cuba, Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia have echoed these calls. Several of these countries and others have either cut ties with or withdrawn their ambassador over Israeli violence in Gaza. In the international legal sphere, the push to recognize Israel's actions as genocide have been even more concerted. Over 800 international legal scholars condemned Israel's actions as genocide. UN experts have also chimed in to sound the alarm, with 7 UN special reporters and 36 UN experts calling it a genocide in the making. Former chief prosecutor for the ICC asserted that the siege on Gaza is a genocide as well. The claim of genocide is also being pursued in international and domestic courts. For example, 3 human rights groups have petitioned the International Criminal Court to add genocide as a charge against Israel in a current open investigation and to issue arrest warrants against Israeli officials that are culpable. In the United States and Canada, rights groups are also pursuing litigation against American and Canadian officials who are complicit in genocide. With this in mind, clearly, there is no excuse to simply refuse to engage with this idea. The question at issue right now is how to prove someone is committing genocide. In 1948, the UN drafted a treaty called the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Palestine, Israel, and the US are all parties to this convention, and it will be the definition I will be using since it is also common in other treaties and tribunals. Genocide, as with all crimes, has a mental element, where a certain level of intent is needed, which needs to be accompanied by genocidal conduct. Article 2 of the Convention lays these out. In the present Convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. As such, a. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. And E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. As you might have imagined, the hardest part of proving genocide is intent. since a law requires a special intent to destroy a group of people in whole or in part. However, as with all legal issues, understanding what it means to intend to commit genocide does not end here, since there is a wide body of case law and supplementary materials which are dedicated to actually interpreting and applying the law, which informs what intent means here. For example, the ICC's Rome Statute stipulates that a person has intent where A. in relation to conduct, that person means to engage in the conduct, and B. in relation to a consequence, that person means to cause that consequence, or is aware that it will occur in the ordinary course of events. The case law delves further into this issue. Ultimately, intent is proven via direct evidence or indirect evidence where it is inferred based on the circumstances. This is because, as with most crimes, and as it was said in Prosecutor v. Gacambizzi, by its nature, intent is not usually susceptible to direct proof. Only the accused himself has first-hand knowledge of his own mental state, and he is unlikely to testify to his own genocidal intent. Intent thus must usually be inferred. And I hope that to you, dear viewer, this makes sense. No murderer with at least 2 brain cells is likely to carry with him a notarized piece of paper that says, "I plan on committing a crime today." It's the same with genocide, of course, because people in politics and military are not completely stupid people. The scope of what can be done to infer intent is vaster than people realize. So, for example, in Prosecutor v. Jilicic, the court held that premeditation in the form of a plan or policy is not required in order to prove intent, though it is helpful for proving a case. The evidence may be consistent with the existence of a plan or policy, or may even show such existence, and the existence of a plan or policy may facilitate proof of the crime. So, with that in mind, what evidence can be used to infer intent? Evidence for genocidal intent can be inferred from the perpetrator's deeds and utterances considered together, as well as from the general context of the perpetration of other culpable acts systematically directed against a group. Culpable acts refers to other war crimes and crimes against humanity. Other factors include the scale of the atrocities committed, their general nature, or furthermore, the fact of deliberately and systematically targeting victims on account of their membership in a particular group while excluding others. Other evidence includes the physical targeting of the group or their property, the use of derogatory language toward members of the targeted group, the weapons employed and the extent of bodily injury, the methodical way of planning, or the systematic manner of killing. Courts also determine intent through public speeches or in meetings, which may also support an inference as to the requisite specific intent. Intent can also be inferred by forcible transfer/ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing on its own does not constitute genocide, but it can be used as the basis of a culpable act from which we can infer genocidal intent. In sum, intent can be inferred by the aforementioned pattern of conduct and through speeches, meetings, and other communications of the sort. As well, a lack of evidence of a plan does not kill this case at all. However, proving intent is not enough. You also need to prove that the perpetrator committed the codified acts of genocide. For the sake of time, I'm only going to be focusing on the forms of genocidal conduct that I think are the most germane, mainly 1, the killing of members of the group, 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm, and 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. If stronger evidence comes forth that Israel is forcibly transferring children from Gaza, or that they are taking measures to prevent births in Gaza, naturally the focus of this claim ought to expand to include those too. Starting with the killing of members of the group, you can prove this the same way you can prove murder. Someone has to die, and the death must have been caused by the perpetrator. Here, to kill can be understood as equivalent to having caused death. Concerning serious bodily and mental harm, this requires more work than simply proving someone was killed. According to the elements of crimes from the ICC, serious bodily and mental harm includes acts such as torture or inhumane and degrading treatment. According to the case law in Karadzik, Examples of serious bodily or mental harm as an act of genocide include torture, inhumane or degrading treatment, sexual violence including rape, interrogations combined with beatings, threats of death, and harm that damages health or causes disfigurement or serious injury to the external or internal organs of members of the group. There is no additional requirement that the serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group be of such serious nature as to threaten the destruction of the group in whole or in part, but it may be considered. Focusing more on the mental harm aspect, the requisite level of conduct can be met where it is of such a serious nature as to contribute or tend to contribute to the destruction of all or part of the group. Although it need not be permanent or irreversible, it must go beyond temporary unhappiness, embarrassment, or humiliation, and inflict grave and long-term disadvantage to a person's ability to lead a normal and constructive life. The conditions need to be met on a case-to-case basis, and the factors that are considered are whether the harm was caused in a context involving rapes or killings as part of the mental harm, threats of death and knowledge of impending death, harms suffered before death, which can count as a separate actus reus or culpable conduct, forcible transfer, which can be an act that causes serious mental harm, in particular if it is done in such a way to lead to the death of all or part of the displaced population, mental trauma, including suicidal thoughts. It must be repeated that the mental trauma does not need to be permanent or irremediable for it to meet these requirements. Lastly, we'll turn to what is considered conditions of life that are calculated to bring about the physical destruction of a group. According to elements of crimes, these include deliberate deprivation of resources indispensable for survival, such as food or medical services, or systematic expulsion from homes. Other examples include, but are not limited to, subjecting the group to a subsistence diet, failing to provide adequate medical care, systematically expelling members of the group from their homes, and generally creating circumstances that would lead to a slow death, such as the lack of proper food, water, shelter, clothing, sanitation, or subjecting members of the group to excessive work or physical exertion. In the absence of direct evidence of how these conditions are calculated, a court can look at the objective probability of these conditions, meaning how likely a reasonable person would look at them as bringing about that result. Notably, according to the case law, the conditions designed to bring about the destruction of a people don't need to have been successful for genocide to have occurred. With that in mind, let's turn to the facts of what is going on in Gaza. Evidence of intent can be inferred from statements made in speeches, meetings, and other communications. On October 9th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant made a public statement where he said, "We are fighting human animals, and we act accordingly," while announcing that Israel would apply to Gaza a policy of siege, saying, "There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed." On October 10th, Ghassan Alian, an Israeli general who is part of the body that governs the occupied Palestinian territories, condemned the citizens of Gaza, blaming them for Hamas, calling them human animals, and then announced a siege on Gaza, saying to them, "Kidnapping, abusing, and murdering children, women, and elderly people is not human. There is no justification for that. Hamas has turned into ISIS, and the residents of Gaza, instead of being appalled, are celebrating. Human animals must be treated as such. There will be no electricity and no water in Gaza. There will only be destruction." On October 10th, Revital Gottlieb, an Israeli Likud member of the parliament, said, "Only an explosion that shakes the Middle East will restore this country's dignity, strength, and security. It's time for a doomsday weapon, shooting powerful missiles without limit, not flattening a neighborhood, crushing and flattening Gaza." On October 12th, Israel's energy minister said, "Humanitarian aid to Gaza? No electrical switch will be turned on, no water hydrant will be opened, and no fuel truck will enter until the Israeli abductees are returned home." On October 13th, he added that They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world. Likud party member of Israel's Knesset, Ariel Kalner, advocated for a Nakba, the Arabic word for catastrophe, and what is contextually a call for a campaign of ethnic cleansing, saying, right now, one goal, Nakba. A Nakba that will overshadow the Nakba of 48, Nakba in Gaza, and Nakba to anyone who dares to join. The most notable statement from which we can infer genocidal intent was a statement in which Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, referred to a tribe referenced in the Bible called the Amalek on October 29th. He said, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you," says our Holy Bible, and we do remember. The Amaleks in the Bible are enemies of the Israelites that the Bible commands the Israelites to destroy as a group, saying, "Now go, attack the Amalekites, and destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." Should this case go to trial, we might have the first legal ruling over whether segments of the Bible are genocidal. I must add that this is not something that is a fixture in the religions of Christianity or Judaism. However, in context of an ongoing attack on Gaza where thousands of innocent people are dying, and in context to how this quote has inspired other attacks against Palestinians in the past, it is prescient. On December 18th, video surfaced of an IDF commander explaining that the IDF did to Beit Hanun, a neighborhood in Gaza, what was done to Nablus in the biblical story of Simon and Levi. This particular story involved the brothers entering the city and slaughtering all of the men and taking the women and children away as hostages. In his speech he said, the entire Gaza should resemble Beit Hanun, and Gaza must look like Beit Hanun today. Adding, the reason why he said that being, do you know why? Because there must be fear among all the nations around us, in the cities of Lebanon, in the cities of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and among all those sitting around us who think it's possible to harm the dignity of the people of Israel. And lastly, he asserted that we've completed the first part, but this is only the beginning. We will return with God's help. By return, he means recommit to the settlement of Gaza. As evidence of attacks on the Gaza Strip continue to pile up, it is clear that there are a series of attacks and policies committed by Israel that can be seen as culpable acts, from which we can infer the intent of Israeli officials. Since the war is ongoing and a widespread investigation has not yet been conducted, I will keep this section limited to illustrative cases of types of culpable acts. Overall, though, the Israelis have killed 20,057 people. Generally speaking, it is illegal to attack civilians in war, the only exception of which is if there is a military target in the area which is proportional to the amount of damage that might be caused to civilian life. The pattern of bombing attacks on Gaza range from deliberate to indiscriminate and disproportionate. A recent report from an outlet called 972 Magazine revealed insights into how Israel chooses targets. They use an AI system called the Gospel to choose targets and are fully aware of how many civilians might be killed in a strike. During the first week of the bombing of Gaza, half of the over 2,000 targets were called power targets. These are targets that the IDF bombs not because they hold any military value, but because they believe that it might cause panic and fear in the Gazan population, inducing them to lose faith in Hamas. A source in the Israeli military told 972 that the perception is that it really hurts Hamas when high-rise buildings are taken down, because it creates a public reaction in the Gaza Strip and scares the population. They wanted to give the citizens of Gaza the feeling that Hamas is not in control of the situation. Sometimes they toppled buildings and sometimes postal service and government buildings. As of recording this, Israel has struck over 22,000 targets. On December 19th, the IDF struck the St. Porphyrius Greek Orthodox Church compound in Gaza City. The strike killed 18 civilians and injured 12. According to a church official, "We don't know why this bombardment was launched against our church. Nobody has provided an explanation for causing such a tragedy. This is a church, a place of peace and love and prayer. There is no safety anywhere in Gaza at present." the Israelis released a video of the bombing attack and a statement saying that there was a Hamas command center nearby. The IDF later deleted that video, and no evidence has been provided to substantiate their claims. Church officials publicly stated that people were using their compound for refuge well before the strike. On October 20th, the IDF struck al-Nusayrat refugee camp. The strike killed 28 civilians, including 12 children. This camp was in central Gaza, an area which the Israeli army ordered residents of northern Gaza to move to for their safety. Haytham Abu Shahada, one of the survivors, lost his wife and 3 daughters in the strike. He moved to the area in order to be safe, saying, "I will live with that guilt for the rest of my life. It was I who suggested they move there temporarily. I wish I did not do that. I wish I could turn the clock back. I'd rather we all died together than losing my family." No evidence was provided for a military target in the area. Multiple other cases exist of bombings that have been verified showing that the Israelis bombed areas that they told the Gazans to go to in order to be safe. On December 13th, eyewitness reports emerged claiming that the IDF shot and killed 15 people, including children, in the Shadia Abu Ghazala school. People were using the school in order to shelter from the bombing. Eyewitnesses said that the IDF killed them in point-blank executions. On December 18th and across the preceding weekend, the Israelis killed at least 110 people in strikes on the Jabalia refugee camp to target what it claims to have been Hamas infrastructure. Killing over 100 people to allegedly target infrastructure is clearly a disproportionate attack. This is not an exhaustive list of every incident in which Israel indiscriminately or deliberately attacked civilian targets. An exhaustive list would make this video hours and hours long and is not possible for this channel to document. It is against international law to use collective punishment against a group of protected persons, in this case Gazan civilians, at any time and place. The blockade on Gaza has been found by a UN fact-finding mission as constituting a form of collective punishment. In this instance, further acts of collective punishment have centered around the denial of food, water, and medicine and related products, such as fuel, to the people of Gaza who desperately need them. This is reflected in Israel's policy of siege on Gaza, which is a policy that Israel admits is designed to deny Gazans of food, water, and electricity. The effects of this siege are very concerning. The denial of water to the people of Gaza started after the Israeli declaration of siege on October 9th. Initially, this meant cutting off the taps of water that came into Gaza via 3 underwater pipelines. Now, I'm going to clarify a few things about this water because of how it is being portrayed by some people online. This is not water that Israel was graciously donating beforehand. It is water that the Palestinian Authority is purchasing on behalf of the people of Gaza. This is water that, by the way, Israel is over-extracting from, as per an agreement with the PA, from other aquifers between the river and the sea. As of 2021, this provided 6% of Gaza's water. Gaza's main source of water comes from the coastal aquifer, which, due to factors I mentioned in this video, is over 90% unsafe for human consumption. Before this war, people were consuming over 80 liters of water a day, below what the World Health Organization recommends. Today, water has been reduced to 17% of the pre-siege levels, resulting in people getting 1 to 3 liters of water a day. As a result of that, people have resorted to drinking dirty seawater. Without the necessary fuel, Gaza's water management system can't keep up with the people's demand for water. As it is now, children in the Gaza Strip do not access 90% of their normal water use, and the less than 3 liters of water people are receiving is below the amount necessary for survival. Concerning food, Gazans are dealing with risks of a ravaging famine. At the outset of the siege, only 2% of Gaza's usual food supply was delivered. Later, the crossing was opened to allow for more aid to be delivered, but still at levels well below what people need to survive. By November, people were only receiving 7% of their daily caloric needs. Before the war, 80% of Palestinians relied on humanitarian aid, and now half of Gaza is starving. 9 out of 10 people are not eating every day, and if they are, many are subsisting on only 1 bowl of rice a day. As a result, 71% of Gazans are reported to be experiencing severe hunger, with 64% of the population reported to have begun eating, among other things, grass. These are acts, among others, that are collective punishment. Evidence of plans to forcibly transfer Gazans have been reported on since the beginning of this war. As of now, over 1.8 million Gazans have been forced out of their homes, and the Israelis have begun workshopping plans to remove them. At first, the proposal was pushed through by the Misgav Institute, headed by former National Security Minister under Netanyahu and other Israelis who held positions in government. The proposal argued that there is a need for an immediate viable plan for the resettlement and economic rehabilitation of the entire Arab population in the Gaza Strip, and believed that this is the only time where it could happen politically. Later, a similar proposal was leaked from the Israeli Intelligence Ministry, which argued that the preferred option for Gaza is that its population be removed and prevented from returning. It asserts that the messages should revolve around the loss of land, making it clear that there is no hope of returning to the territories Israel will soon occupy. Netanyahu himself has spoken about his desire to remove the population of Gaza, tasking a member of his war cabinet to create plans to thin out the population of Gaza to a minimum. Remember, the Israeli government recognizes by law that Jewish settlement is a national priority and that the Jewish people have a unique right to Eretz Israel. Netanyahu, who pushed for this law earlier this year in September, included a map of a new Middle East to the UN General Assembly, where Israel's borders encompass the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights. He's someone who also believes that an increase in the Arab population in Israel is a demographic time bomb. Squaring this idea that Israel has a unique right to Eretz Israel and that too many Arabs being in the area is not possible without some form of ethnic cleansing is not possible. With that said, I will now move on to the act aspect of proving genocide. As mentioned, I'm discussing 3 out of the 5 prohibited acts, but to prove genocide, you only need to show that even one of these things have occurred. As of recording this video, 20,057 Gazans have been killed by Israel. Over 8,000 are children, and over 6,200 are women. The death toll given here was from the Gazan Ministry of Health, whose numbers have been used in previous wars and which are, as of now, conservative estimates of the amount of people killed. The ministry, for example, is not counting the number of people that have been killed and who are still stuck under the rubble. As of the recording of this video, 53,320 Gazans are injured. Reports have emerged of Gazans requiring limbs to be amputated in order to survive the infections that result from these injuries. Children are waking up in hospital beds, finding that they no longer have legs. Notable Palestinian surgeon Dr. Ghassan Abu Sita has estimated by the end of November that around 700 to 900 children have had their limbs amputated. The Gaza Ministry of Health reported cases of burns on the bodies of injured Gazans. In Doctors Without Borders medical camps, hundreds of burn victims wait for surgeons who only have the capacity to aid 10 people a day. There have been numerous reported cases of Palestinians being tortured by the IDF since October 7th. Over 100 Palestinians, including children, after being rounded up on December 5th, reported Israeli soldiers beating and torturing them during captivity. Israeli soldiers often threatened to slaughter them all, spat at them, beat them for not understanding commands in Hebrew, and distinguished them by numbers they wrote on their hand. One 14-year-old boy named Mohammed described his torture saying, "They hit me in the back where my kidneys are and my legs. They took my family, and I don't know where they are." And that when a soldier overheard that his wrists were bleeding from the handcuffs, that he approached him and pressed down on the wound. Mohammed was given a number, 56. On December 7th, the Israelis did another roundup of Gazans, taking 700 this time. After being released, Osama Odeh reported that upon arrest, men were forced to strip down to their underwear in the cold, that handcuffs were tightly applied to their hands until they bled, and that soldiers made people kneel. Afterwards, they started kicking them. Osama also reported a case where 20 Gazans were sent to a pit where he heard them screaming until the screams stopped, and they returned, exhausted and with various fractures. Ahmed Abu Ras, a 14-year-old, reported how Israeli soldiers denied them water, and that on the last day, despite the cold, they were told to dip themselves in the water as they marched south. Over 3,000 Gazan laborers were deported to Gaza, within which there were also reports of torture and beatings. One man speaking anonymously reported, "They detained us for 10 days, during which we were subjected to harsh interrogation. They asked us for details regarding the Palestinian armed groups, and anyone who replied that he doesn't have any information was mercilessly beaten." Statistics that are currently available to quantify the amount of mental harm that people in Gaza are facing are starting to come out, but I will also be using statistics from previous conflicts in order to give people a better idea as to how much mental harm has been dealt to Gazans. Before I get into that, I want to preface this by saying that nothing I have done so far can truly capture the pain and suffering Gazans are facing in this moment of time, and the world should feel shame that it has come to this and that it is even necessary to document this trauma in order to appeal to justice. 64% of Gazans have reported that they have a family member that has been killed or injured. As of 2022, children in Gaza displayed numerous severely disturbing mental afflictions. 79% exhibited bedwetting, 59% exhibited reactive mutism, which is where a child loses all expression and withdraws into themselves as a result of trauma. 8 out of 10 children are suffering from emotional distress. Caregivers of children reported 70% of children having nightmares, 59% of children self-harming and engaging in substance abuse in order to cope with the trauma of losing their families, and 55% of children reported having suicidal thoughts. From 2018 to 2022, the amount of child suicides rose from 8 to 44. After thousands of children have now lost their families, this number is expected to rise substantially, as a new acronym has been created by doctors on the field called WCNSF, which means Wounded Child, No Surviving Family, because there are just that many cases of this. Reports of Gazans apprehending death have been numerous. One Palestinian student in Gaza, along with several other pieces of testimony, said, "I've reached a point where I can't dream of anything but war and destruction. I've started hearing voices, I've started seeing things. It feels like we're just waiting for our turn. It seems like we're dead, but our death is impending. It's on pause until an airstrike comes and attacks us." No one in Gaza feels safe, and they are all in apprehension of their death. Gazans have also reported cases where they were threatened with rape. One Palestinian woman reported that an Israeli soldier pointed his gun at her head and threatened to kill her, even though she had told him she was 5 months pregnant. The soldier ordered her to take off her clothes and threatened to rape her. As mentioned in the collective punishment section of the intent section, Gazans are facing conditions in which they are not getting enough food, water, and medicine. Gazans are surviving on 1 to 3 liters a day, and only 7% are being given their caloric needs. Concerning food, evidence from Human Rights Watch has emerged, showing that not only are they limiting the amount of food that is entering Gaza, but they are also actively taking part in destroying Gaza's fields and crops. Satellite footage of fields in Gaza show before and after pictures of what was once land that fed the people of Gaza being turned into piles of sand. Gaza is also at a severe risk of an epidemic, killing more and more people. In November, the WHO released a report raising alarms about an epidemic in Gaza, citing over 33,551 cases of diarrhea, over half of which were reported in children under the age of 5, and especially dangerous given the restrictions on food. Other reports have shown 5,000 cases of chickenpox, 18,800 cases of skin rashes, 10,000 cases of scabies, and tens of thousands of cases of severe influenza. In December, the spokesperson for the Ministry of Health reported 327,000 cases of infectious diseases in Gaza. In line with this drastic increase, we have seen cases of diarrhea increase to 60,000 and a triplication of cases of acute respiratory infections to 160,000, all of which happened within the span of a month. A big reason for the deteriorating health situation is first, the overcrowding caused by internally displaced, numbering at 1.8 million people, and second, the deterioration of vital health infrastructure in the form of water management and healthcare facilities. For example, due to electricity and fuel shortages, the majority of Gaza's 65 sewage pumping stations and all 5 of its wastewater treatment facilities have been closed, and sewage is now being released into the streets. As of writing this, only 9 out of Gaza's 36 hospitals are operational, albeit only partially. The closures of the hospitals have led to the most disturbing deaths in this entire story. On November 9th, an Israeli airstrike on a hospital destroyed crucial infrastructure for infants and incubators. The bombings forced the staff to leave, only to return 19 days later to find 4 dead babies. Israeli attacks also forced evacuations of the Al-Shifa hospital, and without electricity for the incubators, 5 babies died. The survivors suffered from serious infections, with a third being critically ill. The attacks are not limited to medical facilities, but also to its staff, with 135 staff members of UNRWA killed and over 300 health ministry medics and staff killed as well. Doctors Without Borders directly accused Israel of targeting them, citing incidents where medical convoys were subjected to Israeli fire. The damage to homes in Gaza is also devastating. Over 60% of all homes in Gaza have been destroyed as of November, and over 1.8 million people in Gaza have been internally displaced. In sum, Israel is committing genocide, where its leaders have expressly admitted to targeting the Palestinian population in Gaza and have committed a pattern of conduct involving a series of egregious culpable acts. In line with this, officials in the Israeli government have killed thousands of innocent people, caused them serious mental and bodily harm, and have inflicted upon them conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of people in Gaza. Consider this section of the video as a sort of lightning round to discuss some of the relevant hanging threads that I want to cut off. So for starters, let's be clear about who can be prosecuted. International criminal law applies to individual criminals and not to entire populations. A lot of Israelis might not be very good people, but it's doubtful that as a society they've all at once manifested an intent and carried out that intent to kill thousands of people. Naturally, international criminal law only prosecutes individuals, so think people like Netanyahu or Itamar Ben-Gvir. Though I cited a lot of cases, international law isn't the same as U.S. common law, where precedent is binding. Judges are not bound to the precedent established by previous cases and could expand, contract, or keep the same current definition in a prospective trial. That said, case law clearly has a lot of persuasive authority, and it is referenced back to in case after case. A lot of the people mentioned in this are the big fish in the Israeli government, but the case for genocide can be made for even smaller officials. There are likely a lot of people who have engaged in genocidal conduct and manifested genocidal intent who are low-level members of the IDF and or Israeli government, and thus have likely escaped notice. Generally speaking, there's a lot of information like this that needs to be collected on all fronts. This is a case that needs to be continuously built on, using every method of evidence collection available. Next, I want to gloss over the obvious "what about Israel's right to defend itself" or "what about Hamas" reply that I'm 100% going to see flooded into my comment section. Hamas's culpability in their own actions is real, and it is true that they committed several atrocities that clearly constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. However, the culpability of Hamas does not save Israel from its own culpability in its conduct. And whether Israel is acting in self-defense or not also does not save Israel from the culpability of its own conduct. That principle is represented in international law very clearly. Another critique I want to address are those aimed at the genocide definition that I used here. Many critics consider it to be too constrained, and though I argue that it's a little wider than many would think, I do understand they are referring to the desire to include cultural genocide, conduct which aims to destroy the people's culture, and related to that, colonialism and settler colonialism to the definition. I'm sympathetic to that, especially since the man who helped create the idea of genocide, Raphael Lemkin, focused on cultural genocide. I didn't use it in this video though for the sake of time and focus. Now this last point is something that I can't really make the focus of this video due to time constraints, but I want to mention the implications this has for other states. The Convention Concerning Genocide is called the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Naturally, this means that it is concerned with punishing genocides after they happen and preventing them from happening in the first place. It thus creates a series of obligations for states to comply to in order to prevent genocide. In pursuit of that, it criminalizes conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempts to commit genocide, and complicity in genocide. Obviously, an independent analysis would have to be made to show either of these acts which are prohibited by the convention, but it is very clear to me that countries supporting Israel like the US are at severe risk, almost definite risk, of being complicit in Israel's actions. Lastly, I want to end with a few issues this case might have, which is the issue of information. To put it frankly, there needs to be more information shared about these atrocities to institutions that can act on this. Justice is not likely to be achieved easily, but in the meantime, we can do everything in our power to document what is going on. I'm going to leave the link to the ICC's reporting page for people to leave reports. If you are in Gaza, the West Bank, if you speak Hebrew and, found some low-level official attempt to incite genocide, please leave a comment. The greatest weakness of the argument that this video is pushing is that there is just so much damage and killing that needs to be investigated. Israel in the past has prevented investigations from entering the Gaza Strip, and thus a lack of compliance makes granting justice for the victims that much harder. The more we know and the more that is recorded about these atrocities, the better. That being said, I hope people can appreciate the seriousness of what is being alleged here. There is no way this video will remain monetized, but if it somehow does, I'm going to donate its profits to the Center for Constitutional Rights and to the PCRF, the Palestine Children Relief Fund. I've left links in the description if that's what you want to do as well. I would also like to thank my friends at Dughri Media and Palestine Historical Resources, its Discord, for helping me compile information and just going over the arguments I made in this video. I would also lastly like to thank my patrons for their support. $7 and up patrons get their name mentioned at the end of every video. Thank you to Avocado Kirby, Kazi Khani, Rod B, and Pyrotic Napalm. Thank you guys. Everybody please have a good night and enjoy the holidays.